Yeah, so we changed that. So if you're in a lawn, you can mow a big GRT. I think very lateral like that. And then you see that's your screen on the right. If you constantly mow, it'll just change. With those, unless they're left for a long period, but that looks okay. Yeah. So why I said GRT's hard to ID, the experts are out at the moment.
I didn't give them the option to say no.
Yeah.
No, it didn't sound like it. I didn't take it.
Okay. In the exotics, apart can be a real challenge.
Yes.
And mainly because
Got to be available.
we have lots of intergrades.
Not nothing how it works.
That's
Now, you got to find
just get your
presentations.
Yeah.
Who am I talking to?
Well, the link's been broadcast throughout the universe,
So it could be anyone.
Could be anyone.
All right.
We don't actually know who it is, I think.
All right, cool.
Is
Sorry.
that where all the...
That might be where all the people are.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Are you there?
Yep, except you need to go back. Can I go back? What have I got to point this at?
My computer. Oh, let's go up.
Yep, start there. Fantastic.
They had a fire today.
Okay,
Okay.
so I'll try and stand where you guys can see. All right, so does this button work? Sort of. Yep, okay, just pressing hard. Okay, so thanks for the invitation, Scott and Pest Management Committee. So by way of introduction, I'm Dr. Wayne Vogler, worked on GRT particularly for 25 years now. If you think I've got all the answers, we haven't. But we are starting to get a really good handle on a lot of ways it works and a lot of solutions to these. So I've been asked to talk about giant raster grass, grader grass and thatch grass. I want to say we've not really ever done a lot of work on thatch grass. So there'll be a bit of information as we go along about that, but not too much. Done a fair bit of work on grader grass and probably the most on giant raster grass. So we'll probably start with giant raster grass. So I'm not going to tell you a lot of new things here. These are the two species. But for all intents and purposes, when you get to the real world, they work equally the same. So it doesn't matter what you call it in the real world. So, and that's a pretty typical stand you might get, unless, as we've just been talking about, it gets mown down, then it changes. So these are herbarium records for giant rat sowgrass in Queensland. So you can see, wondering if it doesn't really work, but you can see it's pretty widespread down that eastern part of Queensland. Fair bit around the tablelands. Moving out into central Queensland and right down in the southeast corner around Gympie, Gladstone, Bundaberg, which is really GRT homeland for Queensland at this point, and up on the Cape and so on. So significant issue. Moving west, some of those western areas in central Queensland, that's Rolleston, sort of down from the Carnarvon Ranges, sort of heading north. The Acadia Valley has some, and these are all prime grazing areas, and there's a lot of environmental impacts. Just want to talk about GRT seed passage in cattle, 7 days. Really important for a biosecurity issue when you're moving stuff around. If cattle have been on it, you've got 7 days to empty them out, and so on. So, and of those, 20% roughly remains viable once it passes through a cow. And with estimates, so this is Parramatta grass, which is almost identical to giant rasto grass in terms of seed. So some work done in the mid-90s suggesting that heifers can eat, in heavy stuff, can put about 8,000 seeds through their gut a day, and of those 20% are viable, so around that 2,000 mark. So it's a lot of seed. And this is a really important slide because people go crazy killing GRT. That's all they ever want to do, is kill it. But we're moving to a new phase where it's about minimising impact, maintaining productivity and profit. So it's around maintaining the function of the land rather than just on a GRT killing spree. Because you can kill GRT till you basically kill yourself, and it'll probably still be there in some form. Probably a lot less, but it'll still be there. So we're looking at ways where we can minimise impact and maintain function, land function, what you want your asset to be doing, whether that's producing beef or the ecosystem function and all those things. So really it's about getting used to the odd GRT plant is probably what we're trying to say, because we've been down the road trying to kill it and it's just not going to happen. So some key things for GRT are maintaining soil cover, so that's grazing management, not using fire or cultivation unless there's something else going to follow it, because these plants run on disturbance. If you plough a paddock and don't do anything else, even if it's only got a moderate infestation of GRT, you will have more GRT afterwards. And looking around, there's a bit of work being done now on can we use it in some capacity and change its palatability and its protein content so it's a bit more acceptable. And this is around looking at, there are some areas where we'll never get rid of it, and looking at perhaps we could do some things to make it more usable, so we could actually graze a particular class of cattle through there and still be reasonably profitable. Early days for that at this point. I just want to talk about herbicides because it's pretty important. Useful herbicides come from intensive systems. We've got to somehow try and make them work in beef production systems or natural systems, and it takes a lot of time to work out what they will kill, what they won't kill, what are their off-target impacts, how we manage around waterways, and we really ask this question, how much damage can we do to other things apart from GRT to get a result at the end? Because we might have to accept some off-target damage, but it's how we manage the land after we inflict that damage that'll be the real critical thing to getting the outcome. Quickly through some things like glyphosate, because really you've got two herbicides, glyphosate and flupropanate, more commonly known as Roundup or Task Force or Tussock or Kennock or a few other things. We all know it's not really a selective, it's foliar uptake. You can apply it as a splot, a broadacre or aerially. So boom spray, boomless jet, wick wiper. Actively grown plants. Seed can still be produced while the plants die, and that's because any seed that is in a seed head past the maturity date will go on and still be viable. No residual activity and literally no withholding period to speak of. Now, flupropanate. This is the one that we need to get our heads around and how it works. It's selective at registered application rates. If you put too much on, I can kill a whole suite of things that would survive at the correct rate. So application rate is really important. It's predominantly a root uptake herbicide. Perhaps up to 10% can go through a green leaf. But for all intents and purposes, I would say we need to really get into our heads. It's a root uptake herbicide. Unless it gets to the ground, and unless we get some rain to make that plant grow, to suck that herbicide up, it won't do anything. All right, so we can apply it to actively growing or hayed off plants. So Ken, I heard you talking about waiting for some rain. If you can see the plant tussocks, I'll be treating it now. So we can talk more about that a bit later. Again, if you apply it, you can get seed produced while the plants die because it's quite slow acting. Residual activity 6 to 12 months. Some say longer, but I would be very hesitant to believe that. In some parts of the state, we say 1 wet season, and sometimes if you're lucky. And the thing is withholding periods. There's a lot of conjecture around withholding periods. Please read your labels. The best one of these products to use is tussock, because it's got some better things around the withholding period because they've spent money on the research, and then the authorities have given them some leniency on how they manage it. So really, if you're applying a product, you're bound by what's on the label of that product. So if I apply Task Force, I'm bound by that label. If I use tussock, even though the active's the same, I'm really bound by that label. So if you want more flexibility, I'd be asking for tussock. All right, so, and so on. So here's some of the new work we've been doing. And this is using, so a stem injection gun, anything that's calibrated to a few mils. You could use a splatter gun if you wanted. And all we're doing here is applying concentrated Task Force or fully propionate into the centre of tussocks, and so on. So some of the work we've been doing, so you can see, there we go, the GRT plants here. This is a native grassland near Gladstone, and prior to treatment, come back. And so we did some things around looking at untreated versus 0.2 of a mil. So wherever you read Task Force, read tussock or whatever you want to have. But flupropionate, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. Now 0.2 of a mil is what you would put over a paddock if you're spraying at the recommended rate of 2 litres per hectare. And this is about making it a little bit more concentrated to increase the activity on individual plants so that we can get good activity, but not applied over plants you want for competition around. Right, so it's for spot application. And what you can see here, on the left you've got prior to treatment, on the right you've got treatment. The key thing to notice, if you get a bit heavy-handed, you can start killing a circle around the plants, but if you're just using it, you can just kill those plants. The key things to start noticing are, we produced, on this graph here, so if you look at the blue lines, that's the mortality percentage. So right up there near 100% or very close. Notice the green line. In the control one on the left there, we didn't kill any plants, obviously, but look at the amount of seed heads produced per plot. And these plots were off 20 plants. So we got, over that season, we got 90 seed heads produced in that area. Whereas where we treated it, now this was applied in October, November in the dry season. We could see the tussocks, we treated it then, we got no seed heads produced and no seed. So that's really important to understand. We also went and did some silly things, so, well, interesting things maybe is the right word. The top picture is a creek bywash, and those GRT plants you can see in the middle there have been annoying that landholder for a long time. So we thought we'd be smart, Alex, and just go and do this treatment. So 0.3 of a mil per plant on those big tussocks. The soil you can see on the top, it's almost sand, and it's not supposed to, task force in sand is really not supposed to work. And then you've also got down the bottom, you can see those dead plants later in the season after it's rained, no off-target damage. And that bottom right hand picture, that plant, I just picked it up with one hand out of the sand and placed it back in there, but it's very easy. So that was 4 months, and we've killed those plants in that biowash with no damage on anything else. So I do want to say that it was not a super wet year, but given that there was significant rain, we would expect that task force would have been washed out of those plants, out into that sand, and we wouldn't have had a kill. So the theory behind some of this is looking at those plants late in the dry season are hungry for moisture. We're giving them a bit of task force, and then they're getting 15, 20 mil an inch, 25 mil of rain, and they go yippee-yi-yo, give me a gutful of that, but they get all this task force as well, and then they die. You can see them yellowing within a few weeks, and they just die. So this is some of the stuff we've been working on with giant rat stowgrass, and it's a bit new. I've seen some of the minutes that got circulated, this whole question about fire and ash. We put this to the test. I think we've been the first ones to do it. I don't know, but there's been a lot of anecdotes around, oh, don't spray task force on grass ash, you'll lock up the task force and it won't work. Well, here's a patch of GRT. This is in August, near Miriambale. Just as a side, that's about 99% GRT. And we marked out some plots. That's what it was like before. That's the fire. So that was around 5,000 to 6,000 kilograms of grass. So there was a lot of ash. All right. So following that fire, we applied task force at 2 litres per hectare. We did a whole lot of other treatments as well, which I'll talk to you through on this graph. So if we start at the left, now look at green. The green lines are seed heads per metre square, and the blue lines are mortality. So we start right on the left, you've got control, so that's, we didn't do anything, so we didn't kill a plant, but we got about 10 or 12 seed heads per metre squared. If you burn it, you just get more seed heads. You don't kill plants. Task force applied into that heavy trash that was there, about 60% mortality and a few seed heads, 1 or 2. We tested granular next to it. I'll talk to you about my thoughts about granular privately. In the granular, we got a little bit less mortality, a few more seed heads. Now, task force and burn. If you put your task force on and you get no rain to put it into the soil, and then you have a fire, so wildfire goes through, you've lost your task force. So what's that, 2 litres to the hectare? That's 80, 90, 100 bucks per hectare. So be careful. It's one of the risks in applying task force late in the dry season. Interesting with the granular, again, we lost the granular as well. And I think that's probably because it was sitting up in that grass thatch a bit and we cooked it. However, you can do task force and then rain burn, and we still got quite a good result. So 50% mortality, a few seed heads. And some of these plants were probably still dying anyway, so that's the mortality. Granular rain burn. So this rain, we hand watered it to have 20 mil on because we couldn't wait for the sky. We actually went and did our own rain event. And then you get to burn and task force. So we burnt and applied into that black ash, and the mortalities went to 98, 99%. Burn granular was a bit less. So this was burn, and then we hand watered with rain and task force. It was very good again. Burn, rain, granular was a little bit less. And slash and task force into that thatch was very good as well. So what we've proven, I think, with this is that the question around ash is not really a question. It doesn't seem to worry it at all. And in fact, probably burning it and putting your task force on is probably a better way to go. It gets the task force down lower, near the ground, and so on and so on. Now, we're applying that, we're doing it again this year. In fact, some of those treatments, not as extensive, but we want to see if we can do it again before we really roll it out to everyone. And so this is the burn task force. You've got a few broadleaves, a couple of natives, but a very good result. So this was after the, probably in April. Rainburn task force, there's a lone GRT plant in there. These ones at the front are outside the plot. Task force and burn. You might as well not have put your task force on. Granular and burn was pretty much the same. Slash and task force was a very good result. Burn on its own, you just get more rat's tail. I also now want to talk a little, this is probably rattling through a bit quick, but we're doing a whole lot of other stuff around how can we convert 100% GRT to a pasture usable for cattle, or something that is more amenable than GRT. Now, I've just got some pictures. They've been going, all these treatments, this trial's been going for, it's gone past its third wet season. We're rolling into our fourth now. So this patch here, this whole landscape, this paddock where this has been done in, previous to this trial work, the landholder had managed it by burning it and then flogging the green pick that come off. And yes, the result would have been making the GRT worse, but he was trying to get some use out of it. That's what he was wanting to do with cattle. And so on. So what I want to say, if you fertilise GRT, it goes way better. Even though it'll grow in very poor soil, by adding some nutrition, you can double the amount of biomass it produces easily. It just becomes bigger and angrier, really. That's probably the way to put it. And so on. So see that thatch grass in the top there? Right in front, that's thatch grass. That's been sprayed about 3 times with task force, or at least twice, and it's still there. So that's one of the things you need to learn about thatch grass. Task force doesn't kill it. We hoped it would have. But the combo here is we slashed it, we put task force on, we applied signal grass seed, and that's had no fertiliser. Yes, it's had no cows, and that's okay because essentially the process probably would have been a little bit slower to get into the state it's in. But we're now looking at 80%, around that 80% signal grass in that area over 3 seasons. So the interesting thing to note is that task force was applied at the start, and in the 3rd year we didn't do any treatment to that in the middle year. There wasn't enough GRT to do much. Right, so This was a slash, and then the GRT was let come back, a wick wipe. We seeded with signal grass, we added some fertiliser. So we applied DAP at quite high rates. We had this wildfire that went through, and that was in the same year as we were lighting fires, but it wasn't us. It was an interesting incident. And then we did a simulated graze. So what we went through, there was a few signal grass plants, and we went and clipped them off low so we could do a wick wipe and fertiliser. And then what we realised after that was, in our situation, we couldn't do a wick wipe because there was too much signal grass. So we went to a boom application of task force. And again, we're getting these now to 80 to 90% signal grass, which is useful for in this situation. And it's about maintaining productivity, making the land useful in terms of grazing, and so on. And perhaps helping out some of the peri-urban guys who've got wall-to-wall GRT and that have no idea what to do, but they still want to run a horse and a cow and whatever. So there might be some ways around that. Okay, so if you slash, if you only ever slash GRT, you'll get more GRT. And if you put, even if you seed it, what we're realising is that you've certainly got to make space for something else to grow, and the best way to do that is through some herbicide. And again, wick wipe, seed, and 2 lots of task force after that. And we're back to the point now, we're treating these have been treated this year, and we're using a little squirt gun, just walking through and hitting those odd plants that we need to hit, and so on. So that's some of the new stuff we're doing with GRT, and it's all around trying to maintain productivity. So that squirt gun, you could do that in any situation on the roadside or whatever, you need to do it. It's got broad application for just spot spraying and not doing damage. You do have to realise with spraying task force across your grass, you will do some damage. It will have some sort of an impact. So it's important that we realise that. And we try and minimise it. So for me, the herbicide is a way of pushing the GRT out and getting something else established, and helping the whole management system by having some good competition happening. Right? So it's not about using a herbicide, because we're pretty convinced if you just want to spray herbicide across an area of almost 100% GRT, you'll probably still have GRT. So it's herbicide on its own is not going to be the answer. We want to use everything we've got. So it's going to be around herbicide, planting something else if we have to, but maintaining good competition, because competition will ultimately be the best thing. Maintaining good pasture cover, good grass cover is the first defence for a lot of these invasive grasses, but even if you're grazing or whatever, you still have to maintain some good thatch cover on the ground to assist you with your long-term management. There's another one there. So, yeah.
So in our roadside scenario, Wayne,
Yep.
and I suppose we're slashing as well as spraying. To me, the optimum there was the slash and spray. So, is that correct? Are we sort of leaning down the right way there in what we are doing? Or?
Yeah. So depending on how much you have, I would lean down the road of not doing a blanket spray, if you can. Like if it's dense enough, yes. But if you've only got the odd plant, I would rather keep the competition to deal with the new plants, rather than try and put out a pre-emergent. In this landscape here, I actually think, and on a roadside where it gets wetter, trying to use task force as a pre-emergent is probably not the best idea, because it will leach a fair bit and do all sorts of stuff because it's a wetter environment. But if we can get flupropenatal task force into the plant before you get too much rain, then you've got a very good chance of killing them before they seed. And it might be that might be the road, but you know, I think the leaning down that way is probably a good way to go, yeah, overall. So it's just important to try and, I think a lot of the failures with task force are not really getting their heads around how it works and how it can work and how we might apply it to make it work better. So I would not lean towards applying it once things are green. I think, and during the wet season when you've got a lot of rain happening, I actually think, unless you know, task force there, you probably, it's a lot more hit and miss. I think what I'm going to say, it's unreliable because of the big rainfall events, and you've got rain all the time when the plant's trying to grow, and you know, it dilutes the task force out of the system and that sort of thing. So we started down this road because of access in the wet season, trying to get in. We can do it any time in the dry season as long as there's no wildfire, but we can go and start treating areas and having them ready for the first rain and then start getting results. So that's what that spot spraying was all about. And we did it on Gamba as well. We got some pretty interesting results, and we've also done it on mission grass. Works a treat on mission grass. And perennial mission grass, and works a treat also on African fountain grass. So just as an aside, but I just wanted to point out the green's pretty hard, but just what I wanted to say here was, you know, we're getting 86% of 4.5 tonnes of biomass is now useful fodder. All right, so that's what we can do after 2 and 3 years' time. So we've gone from, you know, 4.5 tonnes of GRT to 4 tonnes of signal grass per hectare, which I think is a pretty useful outcome for graziers. As long as the pasture competition is maintained, I think they're really in a spot spray mode now. It's not a blanket spray because they'll be wasting the chemical. But I also think that if we don't feed our signal grass or don't feed our exotic grasses in a production system, they're not going to perform as well, and they're not going to be anywhere near as competitive against other invasives. So they were designed, and coming into Australia, really designed to have some nutrition added, and I think it's a good outcome to actually put some nutrition on and then get these things really working for you, and so on. So it's a little bit hard to see, but what we're trying to do is look at how fertiliser also changes GRT, and we can increase the GRT up to, you know, 16–18% protein in those young shoots, versus 7% without any fertiliser, and we can also push the digestibility up from 51 to 58 or so, which, when you start thinking about a cow, is probably not a bad result. It will never be as good as signal grass or some of our better grasses, but sometimes this may well be an option where we're trying to generate some income so we can actually do some work on GRT. So we can add some fertiliser, get some utilisation to help us manage GRT into the long term. So it's not about always killing it, but I wouldn't say this is a long-term answer. I would think this is a process and allowing you to generate some income off a beef property or whatever to actually start moving some country to better grasses. Having said that, I've got some anecdotes. There's a guy at Mackay. He's slashing and just grazing this stuff pretty heavily, and that's his production model. So he does a buffer around the outside for biosecurity, and he's just trading cattle through it and putting some condition on them. So, and hopefully that's his way of making some money so he can push do some more work on it, but that's what he's doing at the moment. So
Where does the protein content decline over time?
it does. It really
How
does.
quickly?
So in the leaves, so 5 weeks after treatment, you got 18% roughly. 9 weeks, you're starting to get down to 12. We pulled it up then because we're starting to get seed heads and all sorts of stuff. But that will just steady decline back to pretty much
7.
yeah, as it matures and dries off. We did some work looking at, and it's not here, but looking at what on fertilised country what the and dry GRT what it looked like, and it looked the same as unfertilised. So it's only while it's green that you get that benefit. It doesn't sort of hang around too long. All right, so I'm just going to move onto greater grass. Some of you would have seen this, and it's very early days, but and we've never had enough time and resources to go and do a bit more work. But this is trying to use hormone herbicides, so amoside or camber, or you can use, they're probably the main two. Given that greater grass is an annual grass, it's all about, it needs to produce seed next year to survive. So this is about trying to stop or slow down seed production, and also being selective. So I can put these on, I might kill a few broadleaves, but I won't kill any other grasses. So I keep that competition happening. A little bit complex to understand, but the upshot is, so in annual grasses like wheat, if I'm spraying broadleaves in wheat, I have a spray window. If I spray in that, I can spray before or after. If I spray in this period, I'm going to knock my grain yield around. And this also come on the back of some work done in the US and the prairies, which they have a lot of annual grasses, and looking at how they might suppress them while supporting their perennial grasses. So essentially what we've done is, if you look at the black lines, are the ones you need to look at. They are the viable seed produced. So seed viability in normal untreated seed was 40%, which is still quite low, but we could put that down to less than 10 with the D treatments, which is dicamba, and it didn't seem to matter which age, so at seedling or boot or anthesis. So anthesis is at flowering, and dicamba performed better than amoside. So that's some of the new stuff that we're looking at. We need a bit of time and resources to go and do the field work, and hopefully if that recent project submission gets up, we'll be able to go and do that and sort it out. We did a lot of work on spray topping, so some of you might want to know that is, and again it's about stopping seed production, but this is about using sublethal doses of, say, glyphosate, or if you want to go down the paraquat road you can. And it's about spraying it at the right time to just stop seed production again. And this is, that's 2008, but if you look at the growth here, so that's all greater grass plants, and then you go, that's only 2 weeks later, and then 2 weeks later. So it's gone from that to that in 2 weeks. So these are starting to put seed heads out now, right? So it's a very quick growing plant. But what I need to, I've got a few lines here. So if we spray it when the inflorescence or the seed head appears, so that's glyphosate 90, which is 90 grams, so that's 1/4 litre per hectare equivalent of glyphosate 360. We can knock the seed production down to, say, that glyphosate 13 seeds per seed head. versus in untreated 381. So we can do a lot of things about reducing that. If you look at when it gets to the seed gets to a late milk, or it's really quite mature, early dough, you know, you can spray as much on as you want and you're probably not going to get the result you need. So a lot of people want to go and spray grader grass when it's too late. So you've got seed head, green seed heads up. A lot of the seeds dropped by the time you think you should go and spray it. Really the time to spray grader grass is when you see that first stem up. It's the time it needs to be sprayed, because these things only take 2 and 4 weeks and that seed mature and it's on the ground. If you don't get to it when it's ready, you can waste a lot of time and money. And again, you can put 2 litres of paraquat and 2 litres of glyphosate down right in that, and you know you won't do anything. So really we need to working back in this phase where just when the seed heads come out, and to when you see the anthers sitting on the outside of the seed heads. That's the time to hit it if you want to go down that road. The point with these rates, the spray application rates, is to minimise off-target damage. So that's the real key. There may be some reshooting of plants, but the seed production overall will be minimal. So we need to do more in the next year, but a couple of years of this, and you should really have it back to a more manageable zone. So here's flupropanate on grader grass as a pre-emergent. So maybe visually will be the way to go. So that's boom spray grader grass. That was done at, like I mentioned, Undara, Nick. Too late now. So that had been burnt, and we put that flupropanate on a really hot days in, I think, late October, and with a boom spray. So you can see a lot of that bare ground. So a lot of that bare ground would be green, like what you can see up in the corner. So that's 2 litres a hectare of task force, 3 litres. Now the main thing you can notice in here when you go to 3 litres, so in this picture you can see a lot of still native perennials. Have a look in that one, there's a lot less. So there's your cut-off. 2 litres is good, 3 litres you start getting a lot of damage on other species. Granular at 15 kilos to the hectare, that's equivalent to 2 litres to the hectare of task force, and granular, that's equivalent to 3 litres and the same impact. And there's an untreated control, so that's what it looks like if you didn't treat it. And then this is an untreated control later in the year. It's a pretty dry year. But you can see a lot of grader grass there, here, and then this is the treated control. So you can see the natives quite happily growing. Few grader grass, but not so many. So the idea is to try and suppress the grader grass and still get these perennials to start producing a lot more seed. And again, pushing it one way to allow these native perennials to start becoming more competitive. So you can use it. The downside here is none of these are registered yet for use, but and so on. But again, we need to run these again in the real world, and that's the project submission that went up. You'll know about it, and you'll know about it. Yeah, to try and get some work, finish this stuff off to get it on label or on permit. So I just want to finish off by talking a little bit about high biomass grasses, and I'm not probably going to tell you anything new. I've just picked these 6 out. They're problematic, they cause issues around fire, they're difficult to manage because they're a grass in a grass. There's the grader grass beast, that's a gamba grass. That's perennial mission grass. That's out the back of Mariba. That's out the back of Mariba. That's north of Mariba. So that's green thatch grass. Just out of interest around flupropanate, we put up to 6 litres a hectare of task force on that, and it still looked like that after we did it. So it really doesn't do anything to it at all. And we've tried to do the same at Gladstone. No, there's no bother. You just don't worry about it. It doesn't kill it. So there is a related species called Coolotai grass, which is another hyperrhenia, and it's actually registered in New South Wales for that. But this one, which is Hyperrhenia rufa, yeah, it doesn't do anything. So you come back to herbicides just like, you know, Roundup or glyphosate. It's probably only options at this point for hyperrhenia. And that's probably most of the work we've done on hyperrhenia, to be honest. We've never really jumped into that space. People with hyperrhenia in central Queensland basically keep telling me you haven't got enough cows. Just graze it a bit heavier and there's no problem. But if you're happy with hyperrhenia, it's actually a good species. You can spray out your GRT in it. So anyway, I say that really facetiously because we're not really happy with it. And African fountain grass. So this just tries to pull out some differences. I hope you can see it, but we've got annuals. Greater grass is the only annual, different heights. Seed production's pretty similar. December, May, September to May. GRT will flower all year round if it wants to, if conditions are warm enough and it's got moisture. So just be careful with GRT if you think it only does it for half the year. It can. So if you've got, you know, moisture transferring through the cool season, as long as it's got moisture and the temps aren't too cold, it can keep producing seed. So, flowering to seed maturity. So again, 7 to 14 days. So 14 days is the cutoff point after the flowering or the seed head emergence. After that, you can spray it with Roundup and you'll get a fair proportion of those seeds stay viable. Same with greater grass. So by the time most people have seen the greater grass seed head, it's almost too late. You'll have some impact, but you'll still get some seed mature. All right, so it's important. Other common things, they produce seed and they produce seed and they produce seed. So much seed. Seed longevity can be quite different. Greater grass 3 to 4 years. Thatch, we're estimating 3 to 4, but we don't really know. Gamba 2 to 3. Giant rat's tail 8 to 10. There's the outlier there. We think 2 to 3 for perennial mission grass is something similar with African fountain grass, but we don't have good data on those. All of these are probably palatable when they're young. GRT probably less and African fountain are probably less, so you could graze them a little bit when they're young. Disturbance driven, most of them are, some aren't. So what I say about that is Gamba is one of those ones that you don't need a lot of disturbance, it will just do its thing regardless. Perennial mission might be the same, but we don't really know. African fountain grass, they certainly will go better with disturbance. So that's a lot of fire or, you know, overgrazing and things like that. They all pretty well rapidly establish, although we don't have good data for a couple of them. All promoted by fire, although except African fountain grass we don't know. And this is an interesting category, invasive or opportunist. So invasive is something that if I've got a pretty intact system, it'll just move in and take over. An opportunist says, well, okay, something's happened here that's given me an opportunity. And I firmly think greater grass is an opportunist. In good intact grasslands that have good cover, it's probably not going to do a lot, but given an opportunity, it could be a fire, it could be a graded track, it could be something happening in that overgrazing. Thatch grass, I think, is both. Gamba sits fairly in the invasive. GRT will be both, although, and perennial mission grass and the others are probably both as well. So just trying to bring out some characteristics amongst these grasses. Here's some little bit of work on some herbicides. We know glyphosate will be good on all of them. Flupropanate, pre-emergent on grader. Thatch, well, that's a 1 dot, which means don't bother. Gamba, okay, but gamba rates are off the charts. So 12 litres to the hectare, which will mean you'll moonscape it pretty much. But you could use a spot spray with a squirty gun at about 1.5 mil. So that's 5 to 7 times what you put on a GRT plant. But we have done it, and we haven't had very little off-target and movement damage outside that one plant. So for low density infestations, it may well be an option. It works very well on GRT, mission and African fountain grass. Haloxaphop works well on grader grass. Not so well on giant rat's tail. Gamba, don't bother. And we don't know about the rest. And sulfametron, so the old oust, works well as a pre-emergent on grader. We don't know on some. Giant rat's tail grass, meh, sort of semi, it'll kill it right back, but it'll often reshoot. And paraquat works well on grader grass, but given that the rest of them are perennials, it won't really matter. So I want to talk a little bit about management of these things. You've got to work out what you want to achieve. What can you achieve in a reasonable time for a reasonable cost? What is a good outcome? That's about management 101. I mean, if you don't know what you want to get to, you probably won't get to it, but you've got to know what you want to achieve at the end. And that might be minimise impact, maintain productivity, or maintain environmental values. If you don't get the first few plants, you can be on a hiding to nothing really quickly to actually have big impacts and to stop it moving. If we don't get the first 2 or 3 generations, you're probably in it for the long haul. That's all I want to say there, because these things will establish. Once they have a seed bank established, then we've got long-term issues. And the same for sedge. That's the same thing for sedge. Once we get a seed bank established, it's a long-term proposition. Long-term management might well be the answer. And what I want to say is that little line down the bottom that says eradication, question mark, question mark, question mark, I think it'll remain a question. I don't think we can eradicate a lot of these grasses once they get established. I think we push them into the background, but the minute we stop pushing or something else happens, they take advantage and will jump back into your face pretty quickly. Long-term management looks around, from a grazing perspective, looks around maintaining healthy pastures and ground cover, may include addition of fertiliser, sown pastures and so on. For areas that are lower productivity, I don't know what your answer is. So you can imagine GRT right across the Cape, or thatch grass might be a real benefit across the Cape compared to some of the native grasses for grazing. I don't know. But where you can't actively manage these things, you know, we do lots of things with boom sprays and we've got access and we can go around all sorts of stuff and get in there and do it. But if I can't, they're probably just going to do their thing. And there's probably not a lot you can do. All right, so, and that's where we look at how we might be able to use them a bit better to actually get some benefit out of them, and so on. So I think I'm nearly at the end. That's just a patch of greater grass gone mad. I won't tell you where that is. I don't know if it even still looks like that. But so that's greater grass. It kept going through the trees, kept going. And so the questions are, how do you manage that? Where's the road back? I would say there's probably not going to be a road back. And this is a grazing station property, and they may well have to try and use that to the best they can to stay viable. And that often is around supplementation, using licks to get cattle to eat it and all that sort of stuff, because the road back is just about impossible because they can't use herbicides on that area, that large area. There's not a good lot of sown pastures they can use, and so on. Well, that one, and that's GRT. And I think that's my last picture. So questions, I suppose, if we have time.
Is there any biocontrol being done?
Yes, so it's not in here, but the biocontrol is being done for giant rastail grass. They're just about at the stage to import some agents into Brisbane. So just going back a little bit, they've done a lot of host testing in Southern Africa. They found a couple of wasps that are really quite selective to the exotic ones. They took some of our native ones over. They still seem to be quite selective to the exotic spirobolus. So they're going to actually bring them into Australia. COVID has killed them for 6 months. They're hoping to have them here in the next couple of months, and it's just about rearing enough so they can send them in. And then they'll do a lot of host testing on those. So the wasp lays eggs on the outside of the stem, and the larva goes into the stem and cuts all the stems off and stops seed production. So, and slows the plant down and reduces its vigour and so on. So that's where we're at. There has been a rust fungus that wasn't supposed to be in Australia, but lo and behold, we found it here anyway. It's not, doesn't appear to be specific. It's already here. There is a little bit of work being done on to see how it operates. But I guess we're not pushing that too hard at this point because doesn't seem to be specific to ratstail grass. And given all the issues with pasture dieback, we don't want to make another issue. So, but there's been work done on it to look at it and see how it works. So there is stuff being done on ratstail grass. Yeah.
Also with the seed, when you look at the seed head on some of the different seed heads, they're saying that a lot of the seed that it actually throws up is not viable.
For ratstail? I don't know. There'll be a portion that isn't. So often what you'll see in the seed head is there'll be a lot of blanks. But in the work that I've done with GRT, 400 to 500 seeds per seed head.
Yeah.
So there could be, and like there are a lot of gaps on those stems in that seed head, most definitely. And they could simply be, you know, something happens to them and they don't fill or they don't pollinate or whatever. But I'm not too fussed about that because there's 500 seeds they've got to deal with anyway. Yeah.
Have they found any viruses or anything? Like, you know, sometimes on the seed stem you see those little tiny black marks. They're sort of natural viruses that are in our countryside now.
In our countryside.
Have done any work with trying to multiply them to put them out so that you're not affecting anything else?
Well, the survey's been done. I'm pretty sure they've done surveys in Queensland with it and haven't really come up with those being useful at this point. But there's probably a point somewhere in the landscape that a lot of these things, some of even our native fungi and stuff, get a bit used to them and have a go on them. But what happens with this a lot is that I think those plants get established for a long time, and you know they'll live 20 years, some of those plants, and over time they get bugs and they get fungus and they get things and they get quite weak. And what happens when we go along, we get a lot of fire in it, that just gets rid of a lot of that fungus and then stirs this stuff up so it goes crazy. You can have this, it doesn't look super healthy and it's not super big and the seed heads aren't really big. If I put a fire in that, it'll probably grow another that much tall and be this big robust plants again. So there's a lot of that happens. And also where it's constantly burnt or constantly slashed, it'll change how it grows. It won't be these big tussocks, it'll spread them out, be smaller tussocks and become a bit more lawnish. So, yeah. But we're doing what we can, and certainly the most work's been put in on GRT, a bit less on grader and nearly nothing on thatch at this point.
Yeah, you're talking about the granulated stuff.
Yeah.
When you read the instructions, they tell you to do like a metre around it. And like I said, you'll kill a metre around it. But I think it's 40 to 50 millimetres per grain is what they say is enough to kill the plant. You know, with the salt and shaker sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so if you just put that, I've just been trying to, not to kill everything else, just put some of that on the plant, cut all the seed heads off and bag them, take them away, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
because you're only getting a few stools, just.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you're only getting a few, that's the best option. You can do, so signal grass is really tolerant of it.
Yeah.
But even at 2 litres a hectare, the recommended rate, it's like it stunts it for a little while, and it looks a little bit sick sometimes. So you are actually having an impact. You just hold it up for a month or so. So if we can put, very targeted applications, I think it's the better way to go.
Yep.
Like yeah, there's a lot of work. People, their suggestions are, well, okay, I'll spray that plant and then I'll spray a metre around it because I'll put some residual on the ground. But I bet they overspray.
Yep.
Because they're just, it's not enough. And then they end up with a lot of suppression of other things, and by the time the next season comes around for GRT to germinate, it's the flupropenate's gone and away it goes.
You were talking before there about granulated and liquid treatment.
Flupropenate, yep.
What's your gut feel on the best outcome? Liquid, by the sounds of it?
Look, yeah, you've been.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about remote areas and
Yep.
best bang for buck.
Okay.
Only get there.
Ground treatment.
Yeah.
So that's, like, we just put 10 mil into the ground. You've got a 5 litre backpack, that's 500 plants per backpack. For remote areas, it's remarkable. And then the selectivity as well is just fantastic. We go back, we just did a run about 2 weeks ago. We'll go back in January and there's just a dead plant and green buffalo grass around it.
Yeah. So there is this issue around granular versus liquid. So granular is easy to carry because you don't have to mix anything up, it's just there. And it is useful. What I find, I think it's a slower acting. I think if I get into it now, the liquid gets to there where I want it to get quicker. They keep telling me that the granular is like a slow release, but it can work. So it's really what your preference is. Granular is easy to have a pack in your truck when you're driving around or on your bike or wherever. Yeah. That's easy. Whereas liquid, I've got to have something mixed up. I could probably have, I could probably mix up a litre bottle and have that sitting around and just, I really wouldn't have to measure it out. So I'm telling you all the things not to do here, right? Because it's quite selective when you apply it into the crown of the plant, you'd probably go, okay, that's about 5 mil or whatever, and off you go. So you just got to think about practicality sometimes, and really whether you want granules or liquid is really a preference. It's not.
And with the liquid, how long would it last mixed up? But
I think it'll last a fair while.
What?
Yep.
You can even use an atomizer. Just try and measure how much you get per squirt, and if it's 2 or 3 squirts.
Absolutely, yeah.
500 mil.
500 ml squirty bottle. You go 3 squirts equals what I need to put on. Done. You don't have to have super special gear, and you don't have to mix up, but you know, that gives me, so for 500 mil at 5 mils a plant, that's 100 plants. So you can use lots of things and little tricks to make sure you label your bottle, but
So Wayne, what's the fate of loop and what is
okay.
the residual effect? I realise there's going to be parameters around that.
Look, so the residual impact on grasses is probably, so in some southern states and things they can get a year or two. We would say 1 season max for a lot of tropical Queensland. So it hangs around, like it's very stable with UV. So when we sprayed that greater grass plots, it didn't rain for how long, and it was on the ground for probably a month in 40-degree heat or whatever. Yeah, it was fine. So it's stable UV wise. It will break down and disappear, and things will, you know, and it can hang around for a period. But the problem is no one's done a lot of that work around when can I, you know, when's it all gone and when is it not an impact on livestock and things like that. So it doesn't, it's a good chemical in terms of it doesn't accumulate in your body at all, doesn't accumulate in fat, passes out within a few days, even for humans. So mammals, it's safe-ish, you know, so it's a good chemical that way. But just got to be careful with withholdings for livestock. And with livestock, the recommendation is 14 days on clean pasture. The real issue is that's forever.
Yeah.
There's no end date on that on the label. So if I've sprayed this once 2 years ago with a boom spray, if I'm grazing livestock before I send them to slaughter or before I want to use their milk for human consumption, they should go on clean feed for 14 days. We could probably change that if we had a big bucket load of money, but we don't at this point. So I think there's probably a fair bit of testing could be done around what's still in the soil and the plant material after a period. Joe's been doing a bit of that, so we'll see what comes out of that. But at the moment, from a plant point of view, in killing the next generation of plants, I would only count 1 season. We've certainly at Miriambale seen new seedlings coming up the next year quite happily and doing the thing. So, you know, it's not that long. And I think it's just our tropical environment. I don't think it's anything weird.
Yeah.
And our higher rainfall.
So, Wayne, just getting back to our roadside stuff, because it's important for us as a council. You know, like you're saying with the rainfall side of things, the dry month, putting it out and things like that, it's a pretty hard gamble, I suppose, in this environment for us to say, let's do it now.
Yeah.
In most areas we've got swathes of, say, GRT coming up, where it's morphed to a smaller plant. And we've got some identified recently that were smaller, thinking they were the native. So, would you suggest, I suppose, that we do it earlier and just take that risk, or go down the lines of maybe waiting till the storms have been and then hit it when we get that drizzly weather, you know, or do you back the first one up with another one?
Okay, so you can only apply it once a year. Right, so even boom spray, spot spraying, you can, if you spot this one, you can still spot that one later. But if you're doing a sort of a blanket spray, once a year. That's it. Not more than, that's once a year. So it's not like Sempra where you do 2 or 3, or Roundup you can do whatever, once a year. So that has a few issues because hopefully it's enough to make it, but you only have once a year. It's really going to be about situation and risk and what you deem is a risk. what I'd like to see at some point when this is all, you know, approved, is to do a few trials for yourself. Take the risk 1 year and see, but just do a little area and see what it does. And you can do that. Permit 7250. People can do their own little trials. But I would say just talk to someone who knows, so have a chat to me like we're doing now. But I kind of encourage people to do a little bit of trial work themselves on the low risk sort of thing, because you've got to get used to it. You have to be confident in using it and what's happening. And also, it helps us build a case to, oh, it is working, and so on. So, where you got dense stuff, I don't think there's any point, you just blanket it. And you could wait till you get, you know, the first storm and you can see it starting to grow. I don't think there's a problem with that. The problem is it's not going to work until you get the next rain or something to take it from the plant into the soil. So if you get the first storm and then you get no rain for another month, it's done nothing for a month, it's still just sitting there. So it's important, it's got to move to the soil to be useful. And so...
Because I mean, we could go out and we could glyphosate a swathe down the road, but generally in different parts of the shire, if we did that, we'd have an outcry from landholders.
Yep.
I mean, we're talking about council land here, but we'd have an outcry from landholders. So if the juggle for us, I suppose, is to glyphosate, to fluoropropionate, you're saying once a year, well, you know, should we be hitting the glyphosate first and maybe throwing the fluoropropionate at a second?
Yeah, we'd have to have a decent detailed chat and
Yeah.
we'll talk about it. It'd take a little bit to nut out exactly how it's going to work, and I haven't seen the site, so it's hard to make a
I
recommendation.
mean, we do in certain areas of
Yeah.
the shire use glyphosate.
Absolutely.
Because we like those Golden Triangle farmers to be aware that we are there and we have done it.
Sure.
And they love it because they
can see
know
it.
it's been done.
Yep.
Where in you get wetter parts of the shire, like Eacham, it's a little bit harder to go and spray somebody's lawn that they continuously mow and look after, and it's, you know, got a bit of a swathe of,
Yeah.
it's a juggle, man.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, nothing's easy with grass. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or other things, but grass.
I think about it.
So, any more questions? I won't stop then, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.
Please have a seat though, you can answer more questions.
Yeah,
If
so-
you want it, that is.
Oh, it's fine, I can answer questions if there's more. So, look, that's only a snippet of the work that's been done, there's a lot more. But I was a little bit constrained. If you want 4 hours or so, we can do it, but it's probably better to do a bit more one-on-one chatting about situations and working on it that way. Yeah. But we're still doing a lot of work on this. You know, that's GRT projects, but at least 2 more years to run. Well, hopefully we get it to 100% signal and nothing else, which would be fantastic. But we're at the stage now where we're treating bigger areas, so we can look at a bit more of a demo style rather than plots. And we're also in the Mirambale area. We've used pick single grass, but this year we're planting reclaimer roads as well with another species. Because some people don't like single grass, they prefer rose grass. But we're just using the best treatment and putting in some bigger demo plots to see how they perform in different years, basically. So, but yeah, so we've also, as a quick one, got put in a funding submission to firm up a lot of the work done on greater grass and gamba grass going forward. So hopefully that gets up, and then we'll have a couple of years of trial work to just really nail down the data to send off to the regulators to get it all approved. So, and one of the things that we have, often we do a bit of this work, but we never quite get a chance to finish some of it, or we're doing it on the side. because it's important to do, and stretching the resources a bit, but we sometimes then we get just pulled off on other things and move on to other stuff. So we chase the dollars like everyone else because we have to, but I don't know, grass is in my blood now, I reckon. So I mean, a lot of, and you guys know this, a lot of the basic ecology stuff done around GRT, that's all me. That's 25 years ago when I was doing a PhD. So you'll see all that seed bank longevity stuff and seed maturity and, you know, seed germination temps, that's all me. That's where I started, and it's never left me alone. So I've just expanded species, I think. So. Anyway, I'll stop there for today.
It's not all transferable, is it, from species to species? There is some stuff in the basic ecology and principles of management, but then when you come to the toolkit, there's some real specifics, isn't there?
Those tables I did with those species, they got asked a nasty question by someone and putting together a present, you know, do we manage all these the same? And the short answer is, no, not really. And so, you know, it really asked us to work out what we knew and what we didn't know, and there's a few blanks there, so, and so on, so. But thanks for the invite, happy to come again if there's something else you want me to rattle on about.
Thanks, Wayne. Indeed. Much appreciated. Thanks for your time.